Okay. Hello, Christopher
Hello,
Somerville.
hello, Bill Whiteside. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you. How are you today?
Very well, thanks.
Thank you so much for joining me. We still have not met in person, but this is our first time face to face or side by side.
I
Um,
can I can offer you a virtual high five. Ah, there you go.
Thank you. It's official. But let's see. We first connected about a dozen years ago. I
Mhm.
was still a software salesman thinking about writing a book,
That's right.
and I was dealing with massive amounts of imposter syndrome, waiting for someone to say, what do you think you're doing? And my first serious research venture was I went to the Churchill Archive Center in Cambridge. And per their instructions, I sent them an email in advance asking about certain papers that I was interested in visiting. And one of them was the collection of Rear Admiral Sir James Somerville. And they wrote back and said, "You can your let me just this is what I'd like to show. You're welcome to view any
Yeah,
of his papers with the exception of this one folder." And that R at the bottom indicates it's restricted.
yeah.
And they said, in order to view these files, this folder contained personal information, letters to his wife, your grandmother. I should have mentioned Admiral Somerville is your grandfather, um, and his personal diaries. And they said, you need permission from his grandson, Christopher Somerville. So they suggested I draft a letter to run by them, and I sent them the letter, and they responded that my letter to you was perfectly adequate. Which to this day, I'm not sure if that was a compliment or not, but
I
it
think it wasn't
okay, probably not, but it
perfectly.
works. But you were kind enough to grant permission to view his papers, and at the time, I thought I was going to be writing a book that was largely about Winston Churchill. And I wrote that book, and there's a lot about Churchill in there, but probably more than anything else, it's a book about Admiral Somerville and his career, particularly the battle, the clash at Mers-el-Kébir. But before that, his role at Dunkirk. After that, his role at in sinking the Bismarck. It was just an incredible career, a charismatic person. So it's an honor to spend this time with you. And I understand you never got to meet your grandfather.
No, he died 2 months before I was born.
Oh, but I'm sure you've the family lore. You've heard quite a few stories. You mentioned you have a
Yeah,
scrapbook.
I mean, somebody who's a, a a great man, a famous man
Yes.
in his own family. Of course, there's some saying about no man is a hero to his valet or something like that. But I mean, he was my father's father. My father spoke about him with awe and respect, love, yes, and but also it was tricky for my father being the son of a famous, and also a very sort of charismatic, ebullient person, well known for those things. Because Dad was quite shy and cerebral. So as my father's son, I didn't hear a great deal about my grandfather. More from other people who'd say, excuse me, who'd say, "Oh, that's your grandfather. You're Admiral Somerville's grandson." Of course, I'd be yes, and
I
and I
guess
did.
took on
Somebody
additional meaning
somebody
over the
wrote
years.
somebody wrote a book called Fighting Admiral about him in the 70s, and I was very aware of that being done, and that my father, being consulted a lot about
Sure.
that. Um, but that was quite hagiographical in some ways. It didn't really
I read
explore
that.
it.
I think it was Donald McIntyre wrote that book.
Yeah, Donald MacTair, exactly. That's right. And so he was a figure, but not a huge figure in my personal life.
But you heard stories going on. Yeah, he was. As I dug into the research and learned more about him, I was struck by a number of aspects of his career and his character. But he just refused to accept adversity.
Yeah,
He had a brilliant, I think, 50-year career in the Navy. World War II was looming. It was obvious he was going to play a central role. And then about 5 weeks before war was declared, he was booted out of the Navy. He was invalided out of the Navy due to a suspected case of tuberculosis.
of course they couldn't allow anybody with tuberculosis to be on the ship with other people because it's so
Sure.
contagious.
That would have ravaged the ship. But then he managed to work his way back by
Yeah,
being very useful and very aggressive and very imaginative. I should have written this down so I remember it correctly. One of my favorite quotes from him was he talked about disliking people who, when the house was on fire, went down the steps instead of sliding down the banister. That
yes,
seemed to be his approach to life.
that probably would have been a good epitaph.
Yes, yes. Well, I
He,
think it was.
he slid down the banister.
Yeah, yeah, he did. But then he willed his way into an active role at Dunkirk. He was selected to lead the British Fleet Force H when they attacked the French squadron at Mers-el-Kébir, which is at the center of my book, which frankly that day did not go as planned.
No, far
He
from it.
accomplished some of it, but a ship escaped. Not every ship came under British control. And I read at the time he was sincerely worried about his career and his future in the Royal Navy.
He certainly would have been. I mean, he had not exactly not exactly gone against, but he had delayed and tried to mould what the orders he'd been given to give the French fleet the biggest chance they could of accepting those demands, which were essentially to scuttle their ships, to dislabel their ships, to come and join the Royal Navy, or to sail their ships to a neutral port. Because the context being that the Germans had just taken over France
Yes.
and installed their Vichy government, the French Vichy government, and it was impossible. It would absolutely for certain they would have grabbed those ships and included them and the ports and included them with the German Navy.
Yes.
So one of those had to happen. And as you say, maybe you're going to go on to say this, but during the day, the suggestions of the Admiralty were not relayed to the members of the French fleet by their own superior officers.
That's correct. The communications broke down, among the French, and yeah, I read that Admiral Somerville was horrified at the thought, and his officers were too, at the thought of firing on their recent allies. I mean, they had sailed together 10 days before this happened. They had developed genuine friendships, so the thought of firing on an ally just made this unthinkable. So
Yeah.
he did do everything possible first to avoid a shelling and then to delay the shelling until he received word that reinforcements were on the way that were liable to attack him. And as it happened, those reinforcements never made it there in time, but that was the information he had.
Yes, a lot of crossed wires and missed information.
Yes.
Even the person he sent, Captain Holland, was a a fluent French speaker and somebody who knew all the actors, but yeah, the French admiral was, I think, insulted by the fact that it was just a captain in a small boat.
Yeah,
It was
yes.
if my grandfather had put on all his gold and gone in some other kind of boat. It was impossible. He had to be out.
Oh, sure.
Directing his fleet. So it was a question of stiff necks and pride on one side, I think, and genuine pride. I mean, I can't knock it. Just that it wasn't appropriate for that moment on the French side, and on the English side or the Allied side, an absolute determination by Churchill to show what a bulldog he was. That was one thing.
Yes.
How much more bulldogish can you get than attacking your next door neighbour? An XL bully, perhaps.
Yeah.
but also, my grandfather was a sailor under orders. He had to do what he was told. But it really tore him up.
It really did. I mean, in the papers that contain his letters to your grandmother. I mean, he talked about fearing being the butcher of Oran, and Oran and Mers-el-Kébir are used interchangeably. He was ready to get a serious raspberry from the Admiralty, and yet he continued on. And in less than a year, he took a rebuilt Force H in pursuit of the Bismarck, the German battleship, which actually had just sunk the admiral's flagship from Mers-el-Kébir. Fortunately, he was no longer on that ship, HMS Hood. Yes. So there was
the loss of everybody but three.
A three. That is astounding. Yes.
Yeah, I think
What a,
she was over the horizon, but was hit by a shell in the magazine.
yes.
That blew up, and there was no survivors except these three.
What a tragedy. And then that version of Force H, which the grandfather had the aircraft carrier Ark Royal at its core, and the biplanes from Ark Royal.
Yeah,
Uh,
the swordfish.
yes, the Swordfish. They ended up crippling the Bismarck's ability to steer, and she was a sitting duck for the.
Yes, they basically hit her in the rudder. They
Yes,
jammed the rudders over. There were three rudders, and they all jammed over. What you could do is to go around in a circle, which meant the rest of the fleet could catch up and basically beat her into submission. It's very remarkable. I mean, I talked to somebody that the death, if you like, of these enormous ships was something which was quite unlike anything else because there were so many people involved, and the sailors they again and again they said you have a feeling of you've got to destroy these so and so's until the moment when you are destroying them, and then they just say there's you know brethren of the sea who you have to then rescue and hear them coughing up the oil and comfort them. I spoke to somebody who was present at the destruction of the Scharnhorst,
oh yes,
massive battle cruiser, and that was a night action, and he described very vividly switching on the searchlights and this enormous but very beautiful ship, like a sort of silver or gold ghost,
oh, yes,
coming down a very rough sea, so sway and waves crashing everywhere and spray, and they sort of loosed off, as this man put it, we loosed off our pop guns and then got out of the way. But the sight of this thing being pounded to pieces by other battleships, and knowing that there were all these people on board who weren't going to escape, not a nice clean bang you're dead death, but another kind of death entirely.
sure, yeah, just horrifying ordeal, horrifying images.
Yeah.
And then also in my learning about Admiral Somerville, after the Bismarck, he was eventually ordered to the Pacific. He took over the Eastern Fleet
Yes.
and was enormously successful there. To the
Although I think Churchill felt that I think it was felt that he might have lacked the offensive spirit because essentially I think he put it that he his job was to stay out of the way of the Japanese if he possibly could because their fleet was superior in every way, and the Eastern Fleet was a collection of old battleships from First World War and a couple of newer ones there. But they were essentially old, slow, not armed properly, and it would have been a sort of like a proper confrontational naval action would have been disastrous for the Eastern Fleet. So he had to bomb installations and and be a damn nuisance where he could, but he couldn't really come to action in the way that say the Americans did.
It was almost guerrilla warfare from the sea.
Yeah.
Elusive
So
as it had to be, but very effective.
yes, I mean just what somebody with quick wits and fast movement could manage, but also quite frustrating, I should imagine.
Oh, sure. And then there was another fascinating story, the French battleship Richelieu, which I'm probably not pronouncing it correctly, but had made her escape from Brest before the Germans had a chance to grab her, and then was more or less isolated at Dakar for 3 years, and was after the French after Operation Torch in North Africa, a lot of the French fleet in North Africa came over to the Allied side. So she sailed to the Brooklyn Naval Yard, had firing exercises in the Chesapeake Bay, not that far from where I live, and then joined the war under Admiral Somerville and helped take it to the Japanese. And I read the admiral was horrified when Admiral Cunningham, then the first lord of the Admiralty, asked him to leave his seagoing command to travel to Washington, D.C., of all places.
Yes, but he was about the one person who could handle Admiral Ernie King, who
Yes.
was the American and his counterpart. And I think my grandfather he had quite a coarse sense of humour, and he was quite forthright. He was funny, direct, but also humorous in a sort of, he could be quite laddish, and I think that's exactly what got through to King. So actually, Ernie King, who was I can't remember all the stories, but he was a famously grumpy and uncooperative person, was actually, he's rather charmed by my grandfather.
Yeah, initially I had a little bit about that in my book, and I had to cut back the number of words and pages. And unfortunately, that's
Yes,
one story that did
I'm
not.
going to. Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah, I'll just excuse me a moment, Bill. Just
Sure, sure.
this is my lovely Australian granddaughter who's staying with us,
I
and she's just
understand.
come in. So just can you go and close the door?
Sure,
So
sure.
admire these naval pictures. That's good.
Okay. I'll probably follow suit when my dog wanders in. So I read that when Admiral Cunningham asked Admiral Somerville to go to Washington, Winston Churchill resisted that idea. I wrote down this quote. It said, "He seems to me he knows
Yeah,
the theater, has right ideas about it, and is capable of daring action."
yeah. So I think he proved his point.
He did. He won him over. And then the last quote I had was Churchill wrote that Admiral Somerville is keen and sprightly to the last degree.
I would say both those things he really was.
Yes.
Sprightly is a word we don't use much nowadays, but I think he was extremely sprightly.
Yes, if anyone said that about me, especially Winston Churchill, I would
Yes,
start carving my tombstone right away. So I want that for posterity.
keen and sprightly.
Keen and sprightly, yes, but that's a great summary of your grandfather.
Yeah, yeah. I think it really is. You can again. You can probably imagine how, in some ways, how difficult that was for his son.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure. And was your father? Your father was in the Navy too, wasn't he? At
Yes,
this time,
he went to Dartmouth Naval College when he was 13, and
13.
was, yes, like the old days, it was like a
Yeah.
public
Okay.
school.
Mhm.
Of course, he missed out on the university education because he went straight into the Royal Navy and was a midshipman on a battleship. He had an interesting start to his naval career because the battleship he was on was sent to Barcelona at the outbreak of the Spanish Civil War because um, they were the fascist officers had tried to stage what they called I forgot the word for it, a puntimiento or something, an uprising
Okay.
against the revolutionary government. It had failed, and they were being shot in huge numbers all over the
I
city.
know.
All the churches were being burned, of course, because, as we know, churches were not the right thing. So when Dad arrived on aged 18 in this battleship, they were sent to pick up the wives and children of all these officers who were being executed. And so when he arrived, you could actually hear these firing parties all over the city, bang, 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 and see the churches blazing. And on the quay were about 2,000 absolutely distraught women and children who knew that their menfolk and fathers, were actually being shot at that very moment,
Right,
and that
right there.
he had to be part of the situation and of embarking them and taking them, I think, to somewhere like Toulon, something like that, and disembarking them, or Marseille perhaps. So, it was a hell of an introduction.
What an introduction. Yes. So horrible.
Mm.
And was your father at Alexandria in 1940 when the
Yes,
Mers-el-Kébir was
I
taking place, or
don't
shortly afterwards?
know if he was. He was in a destroyer. I think by that time he was in a destroyer, the Defender,
Okay.
and he then was sent to another destroyer, the Hero. But he was in the Med all the way through the late part of 1940. Probably not, and the late part of 1940 and all through 1941, the toughest part.
For sure.
Of course, he never spoke about it
Yeah.
partly because he was a reticent man and didn't want to, you know, sort of aggrandize himself, and also because it it was something he shared with an awful lot of people of his generation, was the fact that they just didn't speak about the war. They wanted to bury it, I suppose, to a large extent. And I only heard about it, what should we say, 30 years after the event, 40 years after the event, when he and I were on a long distance walk together. And we went to the pub in the evening to have our supper. And they sold a kind of beer there called Theakston's Old Peculiar, which at the time was incredibly strong. It was like alcoholic treacle.
Oh,
And I managed to get 2 pints of that down Dad.
good
And
move.
he suddenly started talking about the war and all the things which I'd never heard. Really amazing things
Oh, what a
about
revelation.
bombs and near misses and blood and screams and oil in the water and smoke. And the fact that he had his commanding officer, the captain of his destroyer, was one Hilary Worthington Biggs, who was a wonderful ship handler, could dodge, bombs coming down from a fire of Stukas, and could dodge torpedoes, marvelous in every way. But he would not delegate.
Oh,
He saw it as his duty to be in control all the time.
everything.
So he had his hammock rigged up on the bridge. He peed down a voice pipe. I hope into a receptacle underneath. And he just didn't leave the bridge except for one particular call of nature. Apart from that, he
Yes.
was on the bridge the whole time. And Dad felt quite, and he never let Dad take. Dad I should have said, was a first lieutenant. He was second in command.
Okay.
He was never allowed to handle a ship in action. Biggs just wouldn't let him, wouldn't allow anybody else but himself to do it, which is probably right because actually they did all survive. But Dad always felt if Biggs copped a bullet, I don't know if I can do it. I don't know the job, which is quite a hell of a burden.
That's frustrating. What an introduction. Yes.
Yeah, a young man of what would you have been 23 or 4, quite something.
Yes. And I was going to mention, I've read 3 of your books.
Oh yeah,
The January Man, Ships of Heaven. I want to talk about that some more. And I can't find my copy of Our War, which I actually read to help me with my book. But I read The January Man thinking
yes.
I was going to learn about geology and about long walks, and I did. But the moving passages about you, the passages about you and your father and the relationship that evolved from that experience were
That was a really interesting thing because I had set out just to write a book about 12 months in Britain,
Mhm.
and choosing a walk for each month, and pretty obvious idea. But
Yeah.
the very young and funky literary agent I had at the time, diamond ear stud and cool boots, suggested. He said, "Why don't you write something about your family, your dad?" I think I must have been talking about it.
Mhm.
And I hadn't even thought about it. I thought actually that's quite a good idea. But can I write about my dad? It's too intimate. It's too
Sure.
and especially as he was a private sort of person. But actually, he'd been dead 10 years by then, and
Okay.
it was interesting because it enabled me to step back and see him much more clearly. And I did that really in terms of, as you know, in the book, a lot of it's about walks that we went on. If you walk with somebody, it's much more easy to talk to them and be open with them because it's very simple. You're not face to face. You're not confronting each other across a table or across a room.
Great
You're
point.
side by side. So you're speaking out that way and he's speaking out that way, and you don't have to. There's a layer of confrontation which isn't there. Put it that way. Um, and yeah, I found it very touching and interesting to look back and try and remember what Dad had really been like. He was a fantastic father. I know he was, and he was a very loving and hands-on father too when we were little. But as a teenager, God's sake, it was the middle 1960s.
We've all been there. Yes. But I guess it was, yeah, I never thought of that. Walking side by side, you remove the blinders and the filters, and
Yes,
I imagine it was therapeutic as well. But
I think it really was, and brought us very close.
good. I'm glad you got to share those stories. Um, One other thing I'd like to share, it was interesting for me. One of the, let's see, research visits I made was to the archives of Professor Arthur J. Martyr, who was an
Oh yes,
American naval historian who wrote mostly about the Royal Navy. And
yes.
he was writing in the early 1970s, and he wrote to every living officer he could find from that time, a few of whom had been at Mers-el-Kébir, but also people like your father, Commander John Somerville. And it was fascinating reading I think I sent you copies of these right after I first,
Yes, yes.
but seeing this in your father's handwriting just really brought some of his stories to life for me too.
His very small, crabbed handwriting.
Yes, we are both the sons of men with small, cramped handwriting. My father's was like mine,
So
impossible.
is your handwriting meticulous and neat?
No. Even after 17 years of Catholic school education, it should be perfect. But
It should be.
yes, I know.
The Christian Brothers.
I let them. I actually, yes, nuns and
You had
Christian.
some knuckles. You had some knuckles left after your.
They're scarred, but I have. Yeah, they still work. I guess you've been through that too. But you talked about your walks. I mean, I
Yeah,
try to walk almost every day. I'll go for 3 or 4 miles and think I'm going far. You would go on like 12, 18 mile walk. You were,
I did. It's funny. I mean, I should still be doing it, but life gets in the way. There's so much else to do. But I walk as much as I can. I do love it. My wife Jane is a very keen observer of natural world, and so it's brilliant to walk together because she notices things that I don't, and it sort of doubles the benefit and enjoyment.
sure that came out in your book too. And you were the walking correspondent for the Times. Do you still do?
Yes, what a wonderful title that is, isn't it?
Yes.
The walking correspondent. I feel I should be dressed in tweeds, with
Yes.
a hat with a shaving brush in it,
The pipe. Yes.
plus fours. But and I think they felt that too quite often. I would come into the office, and once in a blue moon, I met my editor once, and I don't live in London, and I don't go there very often, and it's funny. Anyway, I was their walking correspondent for 15 years, and I was the Daily Telegraph's walking correspondent for 20 years before that. So I've done an awful lot of writing about walking and uh, trying to do that thing where you can give some instructions, turn left at the big tree, and then in 30 meters turn right, but also try to make it interesting and make a story out of it and so on. Is that your little friend there?
Yes. If you'll excuse me for just 1 second.
Yeah, no, bring him up to the camera. I'd like to see.
I will. Here. This is here. Gracie, say hello to Christopher.
Are you a good boy or girl?
She's a good little girl. She's a good little.
Good.
Sometimes
Good.
outspoken, but let me.
What a gorgeous beast.
Good girl.
That's a mezzo soprano you've got there.
She does. Yes. She reaches all the high notes. She reaches all the high notes. Something I wanted to ask you, but going back to your grandfather, we talked about the aftermath of Mers-el-Kébir and the sinking of French ships, and as if his anguish was not deep enough, you mentioned a note that he received from the surviving officers of the Dunk.
It was actually like a sort of, it's like a funeral notice. I'll hold it up here. Actually, I'll just detach this by camera without tearing it. Yeah. So that is signed by all the officers, surviving officers from the Dunkirk. And it says, it's all in French, so perhaps I better not read it out, but it basically says the commander and the officers of the Dunkirk, you vous font part de la mort.
I have a translation. Do you want me to share the translation?
Yeah, make you part of the death.
Because I learned to read French for the research of my book, but I'm losing it quickly. I need to share it. Here we go. Can you see that?
Yeah. No, I can't, but I will be able to.
Okay.
So there we are. Yes, the commander and the officers of the Dunkirk inform you of the deaths for the honour of their flag on July the 3rd and 6th, 1940, of 9 officers and 200 men from their battleship. They return to you the attached mementos which they had of their comrades in arms of the British Royal Navy, in whom they had placed all their trust. And they expressed to you on this occasion all their bitter sadness and their disgust at seeing that these comrades did not hesitate to soil the glorious flag of St. George with an ineffaceable stain, that of an assassination. That's a hell of a thing to get.
What a harsh message. Yes.
Well, yeah, but you can see why. And then there's the actual signatures. I found this in a scrapbook belonging to my grandfather.
I one time saw a black and white copy of that, but you have you see it close. The signatures are in blue and black. You have the original there.
Yeah,
just incredible. And I'm sure your grandfather knew a lot of these men.
Well, I'm sure he did. And let me see. I'll just put that down. And I've got here some photographs.
I was thinking. I mentioned a while back, if I was a real writer, we would have had this conversation before I wrote my book. But even it's fascinating to see this and learn this from you. Well, these are
this is the top one is the Bretagne sinking and a shell falling, and then the bottom one is Bretagne actually in the act of blowing up, that horrible black stain.
And the Bretagne was just decimated. I read out of roughly 1,250 French seamen who died. Mers-el-Kébir, over 1,000 of them were on the Bretagne.
Bretagne, yes. She literally exploded. There's another picture of, good God, there's an amazing picture of her actually blowing up, that bottom one there.
Oh my. Yeah.
Gives you an idea of the force of the explosions.
Yes. Yeah. And and I read they were firing from 10 miles offshore.
Yeah.
Remarkable. I mean, they had all day to cite their remarkable accuracy.
That deadly accuracy. And then 2.5 years, slightly more than 2 years later, I won't read you all this because it would be tedious.
Nope, read whatever you feel is relevant. Sure.
So this was from a French woman, and it says, it's to my grandfather, and said, I met a man who was on the Dunkirk battleship in 1940 when the English fleet had to shoot at the French ships near Oran. Do you remember? I always wondered about, especially because of different versions of whose fault. Well, I was terribly interested and terribly proud to hear that the English gave us an ultimatum to join them with escorts to Gibraltar and thence to England. But the crew, this is the French crews, were never told by French authorities, Admiral Darlon, that all these boats were to make for Italy to be taken over by Germany. The English envoy came at noon on board ship and pleaded with the Admiral to come over, and was by the latter insulted like a dog. Nevertheless, he came back at 3 o'clock and again at 6 o'clock, begging at least to be able to tell the crew why they were to come over to England. Insulted and more or less thrown off the boat, and then with tears streaming down his face, he yelled in French to the crew, Darlon and your Admiral will have on their conscience what will happen now. This was 6 hours after the ultimatum was up. He left, and from his motorboat he saluted the crew. The order was then given to shoot, and the launch and its 10 men and envoy disappeared. Of course, hell was let loose from the English fleet, 500 casualties on the Dunkirk. The Provence, I believe, went down with 1,100 French, and so on. The man told me there never was fouler play on the part of Darlon, the Admiral, French Admiral, who had given the order to resist, and the Admiral on board Dunkirk, who refused to tell the French crew what it was really about, insulting the English envoy, and refused him to tell the crew what it was all about. They still believed then in Darlon, and things moved so quickly they were not able to do otherwise but obey the high command orders. I can't help it, I find it marvellous that that man, insulted as he had been, to salute the crew and come back twice to try and save life, and grit his teeth when insulted, realised they were the pawn and the victim of greater play. I can tell you my trumpet-eyed blow gets more and more English. I thought it would interest you. I guess we had to do it. Little did they know how right they were. What I like most is that in my mind the doubt is now quite dispelled. Had England played foully then, I believe it would have shaken my whole belief and admiration for your country. And as it was told me by one of the French crew himself, a simple man and very French, what could be a finer tribute than that your nation is a nation of gentlemen, his expression.
Oh, wow.
That must have meant a lot to my grandfather, I think.
I'm sure that was very welcome medicine. And yeah, from what I've read, the reactions in France were mixed. Obviously, they were horrified, but I think a lot of people there recognized that in order for France to be liberated, Britain had to win the war.
Yeah.
If this was necessary to win the war, which they debate to this day.
Well, they do. I told you of this incident that happened to me I
that's
think it
right.
was in,
That's right.
yeah,
Could you share that?
yes, it was. Unfortunately, I can't remember if it was in Clermont-Ferrand or it was in Vichy, but we'll say it was in Vichy because
Yes.
it's better that way.
We'll
So I was on a French course as a student. I must have been 19 something from university, and in France, getting on very badly and feeling very homesick. And um, a girl on the course, a French girl, took pity on me, or maybe I met her. No, I might have just met her. Can't remember. Anyway, she took pity on me, and invited me back for Sunday lunch, and we went to her house, and there was a very stately gentleman there who, again, I can't quite remember, but I think it was her grandfather, and he must have been her grandfather, yes, and we all sat down to lunch, and then he sort of hadn't quite caught my name. He said, "What is your name again?" Somerville. Somerville, not the grandson of the butcher of Oran. And at the time, I didn't even know what he was talking about.
Oh, really? Oh,
But, Dad hadn't really
yeah,
talked about
sure. Okay. Yes.
it. And I sort of, well, I don't know. I don't know, sir. You don't know? And then he was absolutely furious. And I think he must have lost a son or a brother or something, a cousin at the action, because on the wall there was quite a famous picture of the funeral party with lots of men in their tropical white duck
Yes.
gathered in front of an enormous open grave. And he sort of pointed to it, and he was absolutely furious. And although he sort of recovered himself, uh, he couldn't wait to get me out of the house. And then, of course, the final blow was that he had to drive me back to my lodgings or whatever it was. So it's a very sticky journey.
Is that a very quiet ride?
Yeah, very quiet ride. And I mean, I'm not saying poor little me because he had every reason to be as he was,
Sure.
but he couldn't contain his anger and his disgust, and having me anywhere near him.
What a jolting experience for you, but for him to meet.
I've never forgotten it, obviously. Yes, and a horrible experience for him to suddenly. You Hitler's son, are you? How interesting.
Is it so? It's safe to assume that woman you met is not the woman who became your wife.
She's not the woman who became my wife.
It's a very, very safe assumption.
Yeah.
Is there anything else in the scrapbook that you would like to share, or was that what you intended to show?
Well, there's a nice picture here to show that it wasn't all butchery.
Yes, yes.
Of my grandfather. He's mixing the Christmas pudding on board HMS Renown.
With a big smile on his face.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a great image.
A nice ritual.
Yes.
And you've seen the one of him in his flying gear, swordfish.
Well, that one actually, if you have that handy, that's worth talking about.
Yeah, he was a pioneer in many ways. He wasn't just a fighting admiral. He was very interested in the development of radar. In fact, he had quite a lot to do with it, and radio communications between planes and ships on the shore. And whenever he could, he would put on navigator's gear and go up in one of these swordfishes, these string bag airplanes, which looks as if they would be too old for the First World War. And there's a nice picture of him here.
That's amazing. Wow. Yeah, I read that he would, because it was rare for commanders, for admirals to fly off the decks in those planes, and some of them were off the decks of aircraft carriers. But I read that others were catapulted off of the back of small ships. What a jarring experience that had to be.
Well, it's nice. photograph that he must have taken, I think of. This is he was in HMS Formidable. Formidable's cat had 5 kittens in this chair during our passage out to the East Indies, March 1942. There's, there's Pussy and her 5 kittens.
I read that he was partial to a Siamese cat.
Yes, with Chips particularly.
Yes, travel with him quite a bit. But but back to the aircraft carriers, I read that
Yes.
your grandfather is justifiably given credit for the discipline and the amount of training. He had a great sense of humor. You said he could be very caustic. I read that some people referred to him as Uncle James, others referred to him as Naughty James for his vocabulary at times.
Yeah,
but
that's right.
But he emphasized training, which is, and he's given credit for the crew of the Ark Royal when they attacked the Bismarck at night in a raging storm, being able to find and then disable that highly targeted ship in horrific.
Extraordinary. He insisted on alertness. I think that was something that probably he prized very highly. And I know that one thing he used to do was to get up very early in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, and row himself in a little skiff around the harbour in Alexandria or in Malta, wherever he was, and suddenly appear on the deck of some ship and demand to know why it wasn't clean or whatever. Yes.
Thank you for. I had this picture, which is my favorite picture I've ever seen of him. And yeah, I've read that he would, many mornings, he would, and this was, again, an officer who was invalided out of the Navy, called unfit for duty, and he worked himself back into duty. He showed his resolve, his physical fitness, and contributed in large measures to the success of the war.
Setting an example, I think, would be the thing.
Absolutely. Yes.
I think most officers loved the fact that he would occasionally F and B and not exactly lose his temper, but be crisp, but also funny with it. And if you did a bad job, he'd let you know. If you did a good job, he'd let you know. He was also in his leisure time when the war was over and he'd retired to the family village of Dinder in Somerset. He loved playing trains.
Did he?
Like so many great men.
Mm-hmm.
And here's a railway station that he made for my father.
Oh my!
Botley was the place they lived in Hampshire. I love this little thing.
And he made that.
Yes.
That's incredible.
And I've just dug out of a massive truck. Here's one of the beautiful model trains he used to play with. He wouldn't say play, I'm sure. And the station master, the local station was Masbury Station, which is a tiny little halt on top of the Mendip Hills. Very few trains really stop there. But the station master was a chum and would come down to Dinder House where my grandfather lived. They go up the attic where he had a huge railway layout and play. Another nice idea, the station master playing trains with the Admiral.
What a scene that is. I never realized that side of him.
And yes, that's a rather beautiful thing. So I'll just show you one of the wagons.
Yes, please show me anything. Oh, the wine wagon.
Yes. This was how they got bulk wine around back in the day.
That would be hijacked today.
Yes.
I have a 3-year-old and 4-year-old grandson, and I could never get them to watch videos of me. Understandably, it's the most boring thing in the world to them.
Yeah.
But if I tell them we have model trains in this one, I have a chance. So thank you for that. Didn't your grandfather, didn't he die relatively young?
Yes, he did. He was 66, which in those days it wasn't your 70 years and 10, but it was nearly there. But he had a thrombosis in his leg, and I think it travelled to his brain or travelled to his heart and killed him. And he was much too young to die, of course. But you can imagine that as he'd been, I don't know if he actually had tuberculosis. His uncle William died of it, I know.
Oh.
But I don't know whether he had it, but if he did, the recovery was remarkable, as you said, to be able to get himself back to fitness. And be jumping around his ships and all that strain,
Climbing the Rock of Gibraltar in his spare time. He's
all
down.
that all that
Yes.
stuff. Actually, and having to be I was going to say the Ben Stokes of the Navy. That wouldn't be right, but having to be the sort of the ever energetic, ever creative, ever alert, ever on person that he had to be all the time. It must have been a hell of a strain on his constitution.
Yep. And
And I
then
wonder how much it, and the background, of course, all the time, this massive cloud of Mers-el-Kébir.
it had to weigh. Yes, but it's nice to know that he was able to enjoy at least a part of his retirement time back
Yeah,
home.
he had 3 or 4 years, and there's some nice photographs of him, with my dad and with his son, my father, and his daughter, my aunt, um, you know, relaxing and sort of going to the woods to chop ivy and that sort of
Nice.
banal stuff. And he did enjoy talking to the local farmers. There's a lovely letter which I unfortunately couldn't unearth. I can't remember. It's something about a cow, and it's a very funny, silly. He did enjoy writing silly letters and silly notes.
I found one. I'll have to send it. I don't think I ever sent it to you, but it was he wrote it in the 30s. It was, I guess it really happened. It was a report of trying to get uh, he was in some overseas port and needed to get back to his ship. And there was a gentleman in a rowboat who was highly inebriated, offered to row him back, didn't realize that he was still tied up to the dock and had been rowing for some time. And you could tell the joy your grandfather got in
Yes,
about that. You mentioned Dinder. Was important to your family, wasn't it, for centuries? Is that
yes. The family had been there. Hang on, family had been there since about 1735,
oh my
when my great grandfather, um, he was a colonel of dragoons, and he was the second son of Lord Somerville of Drum, I think, a Scottish branch, and he had got no money, and I think he heard of a woman of 32 who was the heiress to a small but significant estate in Somerset. And so I think he probably thought to himself, well, if I can fall in love with this woman, that's great. But if I can't, I'll marry her anyway because.
sure.
And so,
There- there-
so they started a dynasty there, and it's a lovely village. Everybody knows us. We know everybody, and we've been there a long time.
I think I've read in your books some of your returns there. Speaking of which, I want to talk about Ships of Heaven,
Oh
which
yes,
I absolutely devoured. To me, it was what's the novel? Pillars of the Earth. This
yeah.
is like a narrative nonfiction version of that, where you visited, I think, 17 or 18 very old cathedrals across the UK and told their stories in just magnificent detail. There were parts where I laughed out loud. I was
Oh,
just
good.
thoroughly impressed. It worked, but I love that book. Cannot
Well,
recommend
I'm
it.
very glad you did it. All the books I've ever written have been wonderful to write, but that one particularly was something special because everybody loves a cathedral, but
Sure.
nobody really knows them apart from being big stone boxes. It's the internal life of a cathedral, from the cathedral cat to the person who dusts the monuments. Is really very interesting. The devotion that they inspire and the bad behaviour that's gone on behind the scenes many times, all that stuff.
And you got to know the stonemasons. You were up
Yeah.
inside, climbing on rickety ladders and holding onto the roof. Just
Mm.
fascinating. And
They are remarkable places, and the fact is that they are all falling to pieces slowly, bit by bit.
yes,
They were built. Well, they were built at different times, but they've all been standing there a long time, and it looks as if they were lowered from heaven. Bang, that's it forever. But of
yes.
course, they're made of stones and they're subject to fire and flood and so on. And the upkeep is just astonishingly difficult and complex. And they were all given these whacking great lead roofs, which, you know, the foundations just wouldn't support. Most cathedrals have a tiny little foundations. Some have none at all. They're just standing there on the ground. And then they wanted to build towers, they wanted to build spires, and endless elaborations in the top story, piling the weight on.
It was, and they were compromised over time. So
Yes,
it's an ongoing effort to keep them and
it
going
really is.
financially and also from crumbling.
Bits have always fallen off cathedrals. You know, towers have fallen, and fire has always been a tremendous backstory to them. Let alone Puritan vandals coming in and smashing all the windows and defacing the images and so on. They put up with a lot, and yet there's a revival in actually in interest in services in cathedrals, just as in England parish church attendance has gone down and down and down, and they're now, most of them are in a terrible state, um, because cathedrals are a spectacle. You know,
Yes.
wonderful singing, wonderful preaching, lovely, lovely clothes, marvelous things to look at all the way around, masses of history, and great acoustics. So it's a no-brainer. You know, shall I go to my parish church where there are four nodding grey heads and it's all very solemn and rather dull and tiny, and afterwards I'm going to be asked if I want to be church warden,
For sure.
which I have just been.
Oh, good. Congratulations.
Thank you. I was inaugurated yesterday.
Oh, that's a milestone.
I've
Good
got to
for
smoke
you.
a huge long pipe. And
That has to be part of the job. I've learned you're not supposed to ask this question of an author, but do you have another book in the works or an
you
intended?
could. I'm flattered if you do ask. Good God. Um, yes, I do. That's interesting in itself. Um, there's a landscape artist called Philip Hughes. You can look him up. He's been at it for 40 years, I suppose. He's 90 years old now, and he has been all around the British Isles and loads of other places in the world too, but particularly the British Isles, um, painting landscapes and drawing them, which have got. And his particular interest is in the hand of ancient man. So, very old houses, 5,000-year-old houses, and standing stones, stone circles, Stonehenge, all that sort of thing. And that's just what I've been interested in writing about for the last 50 years too. So we put our heads together, and we've got a book which is what I'm writing at the moment, and he's illustrating at the moment, which is called Man in the Landscape.
Oh, great. Please keep, I can't wait. Keep me posted on the progress. And
It'll be a whacking great book, which I don't want anybody to call a coffee table book because that's just an insult.
it
But
is.
it'll be basically that size, and it'll, I think, completely revolutionise both writing and art from now till eternity. Really,
What a great combination. I'll look forward to that. Congratulations. I'm excited for you.
I think it's a fabulous project. What about you, Bill?
Um, Not at the moment. I this is the second book I've written.
Yeah,
This book about Churchill and Admiral Somerville, Mers-el-Kébir, and there was a period when I was working on this and researching this, when I was bogged down in research and not doing enough writing. I wrote a book. I was a software salesman. Wrote a book called "Everybody Knows a Salesman Can't Write a Book," and it was kind of writing my second book first about how I learned to research and write this. So
yeah.
I might be exhausted. It's tempting. My wife has other opinions about me and understandably taking the time to write another book. So we'll nothing in firm plans right now.
You haven't got a fantastic serial, 21 books about the history of the West or anything like that.
No, there. It's as you know, it's a challenge. It's a challenge, but when you find a story that hasn't been written, like a little known story, like the
Yeah,
last thing the world needed is another book about Winston Churchill. So I was thrilled to find this
yeah,
small story that's mentioned
yeah.
in every biography, but it's been very little written about. I found that most people still do not know about it, and those who
Yes,
know about it don't know. They have misconceptions and don't know everything about it. So it was certainly a rare privilege to have found this story and to have had the chance to write about it. I cannot thank you enough for your kindness, for the information you've shared, and
I really enjoyed visiting it. It's been fascinating, and you've done a fantastic job. I mean, nobody would know that that's essentially your first book. I think you spun it together beautifully and brought light and shade to those characters who, frankly, some of them we've all heard of, Winston Churchill, and others that we haven't. And you know, history can be full of empty suits hanging on
yeah.
hangers, and it's great to have it fleshed out and to see the people behind it.
Well, thank you very much. I felt I had a duty to do justice to people like Admiral Somerville, Captain Holland, other. I was going to say men and women. It's mostly men in the story based on the times. But thank you. I very much appreciate your kind words. That seems like it's probably a perfectly adequate way to wrap this up. Is there anything that I missed that you would like to add about your career, your family, your father, your grandfather?
No, I don't think so. I think we've covered it very well. But I can pipe you off ship if you like by using my grandfather's bosun's whistle.
Wouldn't that be perfect?
I
That's
can't I can't really play it properly because, as you see, it's basically got a hole in it,
oh yes, okay.
and another hole in it, and that's it.
What a
But
great
I think that
treasure.
I know that you kind of do this with it, and then it's what if well if our grandfather was appearing on a ship and he would just shin up a ladder and suddenly appeared, he wouldn't get one of these. But if he was making a formal visit, then the bosuns would line up, five or six of them, and play these things. But it is not a pretty sound. It's a bit, and your dog will be interested in this.
Maybe probably she may come running back in. I'll see if I can add the sound effect. Well, Christopher, thank you very much. Great seeing you.
Great seeing you too, Bill.
All right, thank you.